It's all good. We are going to notify the members, put up the video, Lauren.
I was inspired to found Build My SOP because I was a manager running these facilities for many years, and the Achilles heel I've seen in every business that I've entered has always been their standard operating procedures and their employee training. Build My SOP offers document management, learning management, and task management for our business owners and our managers. We're a really easy platform to be able to navigate and to be able to track and keep revisions of all of the changes that you've made within the years of your facility being open. And the plants don't stop growing and retail stores don't stop selling. And so it's very challenging to keep up with this when you're also having to get product out of the door at the end of the day. People should sign up with Build My SOP right now because regulations are in place right now. Regulations are going to be in place in the future, and things are going to be evolving and changing as long as this industry is here. We're really a vendor that people can trust. We're helping people with their bottom line, creating homogenized products, creating employee accountability, and just helping them with that peace of mind at the end of the day. Hello, hello. Welcome to the premiere podcast of Ask the Regulator. I am your host, Katie Cravens, founder and CEO at buildmysop.com. And joined with me this evening is Tom Mohan, the former regulator from the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division. How you doing, Tom?
Doing good, Katie. How about yourself?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me tonight. I know this has been an anticipated segment that we're putting on, and I'm really excited to share with our cannabis and hemp community, and hopefully, help them out with some of our experiences and just our stories from our years in the industry.
Absolutely.
So good segue into that. Just to let the audience know a little bit about myself. My name is Katie. I am the founder and CEO at buildmysop.com. I have a unique story in the cannabis industry in that I have worked almost every position in my years in the industry, starting off as a janitor in a cultivation facility. Within 6 months, I was being introduced as, this is Katie. She runs my grow and dispensary. I often joke that every grow needs a grow mom. I just really dove into everything I could get my hands on. It was, before kids. So working those 16, 17-hour shifts, 6 or 7 days a week was a possible thing for me. So I've literally worked in cultivation facilities, running retail facilities, and every position within both of those. Manufacturing facilities. Other than extracting material myself, I am not a lab technician or a scientist, and so I've stayed out of that. But I have run manufacturing facilities as well as transportation and delivery. So I've kind of got a real good overview of what these procedures actually look like from an employee's account. So that's a little bit about me. I did a lot of compliance consultation work with my company, Act Compliant, over the years throughout the nation, even did a little bit of international work in Jamaica and South America. The Achilles heel I was seeing in every industry or in every market, every business that I went into was standard operating procedures, employee training, and really looping that all together. So we started buildmysop.com because I needed something as a manager to help me and assist me in keeping up with all these regulatory changes, keeping my employees up to date on all those changes, and keeping our doors open at our facilities. And so we're really excited to be in 9 states now with buildmysop.com and growing rapidly. And our customers are really enjoying the platform. So we're happy to be here. And very happy to have our VP of Regulatory Affairs, Tom Mohan, on board with the company. And Tom, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background as a regulatory enforcement
Sure.
officer.
Thanks, Katie. So I started public safety career back in 1990 as an EMT, working on an ambulance, progressed to being a paramedic, worked that for approximately 8 years, and then started a law enforcement career where I worked at sheriff's office, a couple different police departments, where I specialized in the narcotic side of things and methamphetamine clandestine labs, learning kind of the science behind extractions is kind of where that started. Then 2014, with the onset of adult use recreational cannabis in Colorado, I actually took a position with the Marijuana Enforcement Division as a criminal investigator. I was there up until last year in September. So just had 7 years I was there, and I worked from being a criminal investigator to a subject matter expert and a supervisor out of one of the offices. While I was there, I got a chance to look at a lot of different SOPs, or in a lot of cases, the lack of SOPs. Some places had a single page SOP for their entire operation. And a lot of our investigations stemmed around the lack of the standard operating procedures and things like that. And through the years, I've worked with Katie and spoken about compliance and kind of met up with her and decided to go a little different direction. And now I work on this side of it.
And we are happy to have you here. Yeah, Tom and I have a very long background, actually. I get hired to come into facilities and do what I call facility flips and kind of clean up shop. And Tom was somebody that I communicated a lot in my work and getting facilities on the right track, and really, really was great to work with. So when I learned that he was going to be joining the other side, I was thrilled to have him come on board to build my SOP.
And I'm happy to be here, Katie. Thank you.
Oh, we work great together. It's really, really a great experience. So let's talk a little bit about exactly what a standard operating procedure is, right? So a standard operating procedure outlines in detail, step by step, how a procedure is performed. That could be as simple as unlocking the door, right? Arming and disarming the alarm system, how to clean a pesticide or chemical container before recycling it. So a lot more than just cultivating or how to actually manufacture the product. It's really saying everything that could happen from when the door's open to when the door closes throughout your entire year, or entirety of your business's lifetime. The state and in-house want to see exactly how those procedures are performed. And there's tons of benefits, not only from a regulatory standpoint, to having really detailed standard operating procedures in place when you're running a business. And some of these benefits are, just creating a homogenized product, being able to time things correctly, right? Saving money with timing. So increasing profitability, being able to hold employees and management and ownership accountable. A lot of these employees, when I go into a facility, they are begging for structure and they are begging for things to be defined and for things to be very clear. And so standard operating procedures help with all of that. And Tom, I'll let you kind of add on any of the benefits and any more definition of a SOP too.
Yeah, so one of the big things with a standard operating procedure, it's a roadmap. It gives somebody direction on how to do the position that they're in. The standard operating procedure, like Katie said, holds people accountable. And I'll give a prime example. I had a case where I spoke with an owner. He was missing several thousand grams of concentrates. We actually did some math on it, and he was missing upwards of $500,000 in concentrates.
Ouch.
And he says, "How is this possible?" Well, I said, "Well, let's look at your SOP and let's see where the problem lies at." He didn't have an SOP. basically whoever was doing the gramming or whoever was handing it out, they had no accountability. They just did as they were told. Hey, you take this, you take that. So they didn't have an actual roadmap to go by. So once he saw that and started looking at that, because we went to go look at his cameras, he's like, I can't afford cameras. I'm like, well, you could afford cameras if you had direction that your employees were taking, and you could have saved that $500,000 or put it towards the cameras.
Well, and that $500,000, was that the wholesale price or was that the retail price?
That was wholesale price. That was
so really, that was a good $1 million worth of product that had just floated away from him. Oof.
That was $500,000 that he lost specifically as the wholesaler. So, and that's basically because he didn't have standard operating procedures to hold individuals accountable. So he was losing this right outside the door. The standard operating procedure should be a task that somebody can pick up, be trained on rather quickly, and know how to do that process. And it should be the same process every single time. And that's what the standard operating procedure is a roadmap to make sure you've got consistency and it's done over and over again, no matter who's doing the task.
Absolutely. And at buildmysop.com, we offer templates that people can customize and fill out to their specific, IP, their specific local and state regulations, or we can help them and we can identify all of those customizations that need to be done in the SOP. And I know that it's always been a struggle when you're running your business to spend and dedicate hours and hours to those really tight-knit SOPs that are extremely detailed. And there's really a lot to oversee, especially when you haven't opened a cannabis facility before and you're already required to turn in SOPs on how to operate, but you haven't even been open a day yet. So you're not really sure what the state is looking for. So Tom, what are regulators looking for when they're reviewing standard operating procedures?
So we're looking for thoroughness and specificity. What that means is we're looking to make sure that the standard operating procedure is complete and whole. I've seen standard operating procedures that basically say water plants. Well, it doesn't say when to water the plants, how much to water the plants. All of that is very important.
What kind of water are you watering the plants with? pH balance, exactly. RO.
And that's what we're looking for when I say specificity is all of those little details. They need to go to the same spot, use the same water, the same time for whatever the SOP stands for and how to grow that way. That way they have a consistent product. If they don't have an SOP, they're really putting themselves at an increased risk for a regulatory violation. And that regulatory violation can mean just a fine. It could be days of suspension. It could be a violation that your license gets suspended or revoked to the point where you just lost all that money that you invested in that business just because you didn't have a set of guidelines for people to follow.
Absolutely. And can you give us an example of some of the things that require some further definition when you are writing SOPs, like maybe acronyms that are used or,
All acronyms need to have a definition to it. There's no problem with using acronyms. A lot of people in cultivations use the acronym PM for powdery mildew. Well, if somebody's coming in to look at it, and when we say thoroughness and specificity, we got to know what that PM actually stands for. So in the definition at the top, you can refer to PM as powdery mildew, and then the rest of the SOP can refer to PM because you've already defined what it is. So when an SOP is written, you've got to look at it from the standpoint that I would go in as a regulator and I would read the SOP. I should be able to follow along and see exactly what the process is. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be great at it to actually do the task, but I can understand it and follow it. So if you've got RO and it says use RO water, most people would think that that's reverse osmosis, but somebody might have an acronym that they're going to use it for, that it means remediated odor water. So that's why you've got to have that definition in there so everybody knows exactly what they're talking about, and everybody can do it the exact same way and they know exactly what they're talking about.
Absolutely. And also, I think in my experience, what's made me really great at writing these SOPs is just having that experience of actually doing the procedure myself. And so keeping in mind your audience when you're writing these standard operating procedures. Make it digestible, make it relatable, make it something that people don't really, have to go open up a dictionary as they're running through the SOP to understand. Get your point across clearly and make it simple, right? So we can be detailed, but we can still be really simple in that detail.
Yeah, and SOPs don't need to be written in a paper format and put in a binder in the office and forgotten about. They really need to be reviewed on a regular basis, and updated on a regular basis.
Absolutely. And we do offer those review processes quarterly, biannually, and annually, where we'll go in and actually review SOPs and compare them to the most current regulatory standards within your municipality and your state. And then we'll let companies know, hey, these SOPs were affected from our review, and these updates have been made, and these are the SOPs that your employees need to be retrained on. What good is an SOP if it's not in use, right? So we're really trying to change people's concept of that SOP being in a printed book on a shelf collecting dust, and it's just there for when the regulator comes. They can benefit your company so much. I mean, so many benefits come along with following these SOPs. And so we've built a platform that you can not only host your SOPs, all of your changes, all of your versions and revisions, but then you can even take it further and actually use it in a learning management setting. And then you can take it even further and use it in a task management setting. So we're really trying to change the way that people see and use SOPs and making them a daily part of their lives at Build My SOP. And I think it's extremely important. Let's talk a little bit about that, Tom, and the task management and SOPs and how they can help companies in risk mitigation. So, if you can prove that your company is trying to do the right thing and you're giving all of your employees the tools to do so, how does that help in a regulator's eyes when you are dealing with an unfortunate scenario?
Well, I love the task management system and how you can actually send the SOP in an email. And I'll get to that in just a second on why that's great as a regulator standpoint. So one of the things you got to look at, if you have a violation, we as regulators looked at things that are called mitigating and aggravating factors. Aggravating factors are something along the lines of the employee had no training, or the employee's training was so inadequate or so long ago that the employee really didn't know any better. And I'll use a prime example is underage sales and checking IDs at the front counter. If you were trained on how to check IDs 2 years ago and never received any updated training, well, there's new IDs out there. There's different IDs out there. China has been producing IDs with greater and greater quality on it. So some of the procedures that you're using to find these, they need to change with your SOP. So if you're not training that's called an aggravating factor. The licensee or the business owner is going to be punished more because they didn't give the tools to their employees to succeed. Now, with the SOP that gets attached in the task management, I love that feature because you can send, hey, Tom, you're working the front door today. Here's the SOP on how to check IDs. So if there is a violation, you can say not only did you train them, you can pull up the training from the file that they were trained in a short period of time, and they just had the SOP given to them that day, an hour ago, 2 hours ago. It was attached to their email, not in paper format, sitting in the boss's office that never gets used. So that takes away a lot of the factors that the business owner gave all of the proper training, procedures, equipment, and this person still failed to do that. Well, let's put a lot more of the blame on the person that failed to follow the SOP that they were just given that day. So that's why I love the task management system. It's an excellent mitigating factor for licensees and businesses.
Yep. And that's, I'm really happy to be able to offer that and just that extra little bit of peace of mind for the owners and operators that work with us, because I have run these facilities and it's hard. There's a lot to oversee, and most people want to do the right thing. So it's great that we have a tool that gives them just that little extra oomph to show that they really are doing the right thing. I've seen an incident in a retail store where MED came in to look for something completely unrelated, and they checked the cameras for about 25 minutes. And when they checked the cameras, they saw the individual was taking the ID at the point of sale like she was supposed to, looking at it, and then just handing it right back. In her head, that ID was verified at the front door. But the law in Colorado clearly states that it needs to be verified at the point of sale. And so they watched her for 25 minutes, and there was a $5,000 fine associated each time she did this in this 25 minutes. 5 people she saw. And so within that 25 minutes, for something they didn't even come in to review, this facility ended up with a $25,000 fine. And they could have watched that all day, and they could have tracked that girl. So, at $25,000, they're like, okay, do you get our point here? And if they had proper training in place that said, hey, look at the individual, make sure that individual matches the person on their ID. All right, now look at the date that it expires. Look at this individual again. Look back down at the ID. Look at their birthday. Look at the individual again. Look down at that ID. If they had that on top of, I know when I was running facilities in Boulder, they had a great expert that came out and would spend a whole day at the front desk with your staff and reviewing IDs that came in and comparing them to the books that are supplied by the state, and discussing too other IDs that come through, right, from like Native American nations. Those are valid IDs, military IDs, other things like that. So it's a lot more than just check the ID, swipe it through the thing, and send them on their way. It's a pretty serious job you're giving somebody for your facility being open. It's a very serious job that they're undertaking every time they conduct a sale.
And I think that the front desk where they first initially check their ID is one of the most important positions there, because so many people put the new person there, and that's where that should be your strongest link, is at that front desk.
I agree.
So, yeah, the other thing too is some of the operations that I did when I was with the MED, we used undercover operatives that had different types of IDs. They were valid, but like you said, an Indian reservation ID, a tribal ID. There's multiple tribes without the whole United States, and they all have different tribal ID cards. What do they look like? What do they do if they encounter one? And that's where your SOP needs to rely on that and say, this is where you can go. You can put in websites in there to say, hey, this is where you can confirm what a tribal ID for this particular tribe looks like. That's where the task management system is wonderful again. So they can go back and say, hold on one second, this is an ID I haven't seen before. Let me go through. Okay, I can go here and do this operation. And that's not only going to save that person from potentially losing their occupational badge, but also the licensee from getting days of suspension, massive fines, and also having a black mark on your license.
Or a possible license forfeiture, having to give up your license. I've seen that happen.
Some jurisdictions have where you have so many violations and your license is taken away. So that's, you're not only jeopardizing it from the state level, you're also jeopardizing it from a local level, which in Colorado, it's a dual licensing system. You have to have both. But yeah, I love the task management with the SOP directly in it.
Absolutely, me too. And just, to touch on, the expense that, people will often ask me, is non-compliance expensive? It absolutely can be. And I know that you had given me some numbers from 2020 from Colorado that I'll share here. And I mean, it can be expensive. So it looks like in 2020, the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division, they took 108 administrative actions against non-compliant operators. And this was considered to be an extremely light year because COVID-19 prevented many inspections, right? And most of your inspections, I think, that you guys performed were online. That year, fines ranged just from the MED, $7,500 to $200,000. And license forfeiture, right? Which is, the cost of that is just ridiculous. I've seen people throw away $6-8 million facilities because of non-compliant behavior. So local jurisdictions can also levy fines, right? And so you could get a $200,000 fine from the MED, and then locally they could give you fine up to $400,000. So one of these mistakes could possibly cost your company $600,000 or more.
Or even days of suspension where you're not operating.
Where you're not making any money.
especially as a store, if you're not selling, you're not making money, and while it's not an actual fine paid out, that's money that you're losing out on.
Yep. And that hurts. That really hurts. And I know most of the issues that came from these fines that we're discussing from 2020 in Colorado were from, testing issues. Metric issues is always a big one. Those metric discrepancies, your state seed to sale system, tax errors, like you mentioned, selling to underage persons, or even selling to an unlicensed entity. So if you're selling in the black market because you got to get product out the door, that's something that the state catches on to also.
Yep.
So talking about money here, I know we talked about the individual that lost the $500,000 worth of product. So on top of that $500,000 worth of product, what type of fines was that individual facing?
I don't recall what the range for those violations. I think was upwards of $250,000 on that particular case. Each fine can be compounded. So, and once again, when I talked about the mitigating and aggravating factors, when we look and see how things were done, the aggravating factor is going to be, of course, a larger fine. Mitigating, where the licensee did everything correct, had proper SOPs, it's going to be a lower fine. In that particular case, because they didn't have any SOPs, it was a higher fine.
Yeah, bummer. I know in a project I worked on with you in the past where they hired me to come in and do a facility flip and get things cleaned up, I'd found a lot of things that were wrong. And we remediated all of those things. We had to actually get rid of a ton of product that wasn't actually manufactured in a legal manner. So they lost all of that money, not only paying people to create the product and package the product, but then throwing it away, which I think I called you. I was not into taking a bunch of vape carts with a hammer and glass, and then dealing with, a workers' comp issue. And so I had gotten, and I'm telling everyone this because it's the way to do it. I got a Home Depot bucket and I got some concrete, and I put, hundreds of vape carts into this Home Depot bucket and let the concrete lay in there and then dry. And then we threw it away in the dumpster and logged all of that and reported it to the Marijuana Enforcement Division. And you told me I maybe went a little overboard on on making it unusable, unrecognizable, and mixing 50-50 with trash. But from a labor standpoint, that was really the way to do it, right? I took something that could have taken days and I turned it into a 30-minute project. So it was, and then we were completely safe. They were completely unusable and unrecognizable. No doubt about that. But after we did all the remediation and fixed things, we then submitted, we said, okay, here's our old set of SOPs. This is how we messed up. Here's our new set of SOPs, and these are how these procedures are going to be followed from here on out. And the MED seemed satisfied in that scenario. So, I think really what the regulators are looking for is accuracy, consistency, and transparency, right? ACT, the three keys to compliance. Act compliant. Accuracy, consistency, transparency. And my motto is, if you want to be compliant, then act like it. Be accurate, consistent, and transparent. And that's really all anyone can ask of us.
And I agree 100%.
So I think it'd be great to share maybe another few stories that we've seen, kind of the horror stories for owner operators that they've had to experience. Is there something else that comes to mind with you where an SOP could have really assisted in their?
Yes. So I've got hundreds of them, and I just got to be careful on how much information I give out because I don't want anybody to be identified by it. But I had one where they went in, a company brought some product to them, and they were doing a buyback, and the person that was working the counter accepted the manifest and basically signed it. And the person that was bringing it in said, "Hey, I'm doing a buyback on the rest of the stuff. And so here's a little bit of money." And the person took the manifest, set it off to the side, never saw the product at all. And it was well over, it was actually several ounces of concentrates that they bought back. So it was well over that, the equivalent of 1 ounce of concentrate. So it got the person that sold it in trouble, the person that bought it in trouble, and the two companies that were involved with it in trouble, all because somebody didn't have an SOP that says, hey, what do I need to do in this case? Let me read the SOP, and it says, okay, I need to see the product. Hey, I need to do this when I get a manifest in. Hey, hey, where is this product? Hey, I can't sell all that to you at this time. So that SOP, if they would have just stopped and looked at the SOP, this company didn't have one for that particular purpose. But if they had one, it would have saved them a lot of money and a lot of heartache, because that case went on for approximately 8 months that they didn't know what was going to happen to their business. So not only the money and the fines, but the people that were involved with it had the emotional stress that went with what's going to happen. And as the regulator in Colorado, we don't actually have a set, hey, if you do this, this is going to be the fine. It ultimately goes through an order to show cause, and they look at the mitigating and aggravating factors to see what the fine is going to be. So, to actually tell an owner, yeah, I did it, and what's the fine? I don't even know. So you have to sit there and have that mental anguish of not having that SOP that didn't prevent all this. Just a simple little, hey, this is what you need to do in these cases.
Well, and when I run
Or don't.
retail stores, if we have people that call, there's calls all the time from new manufacturers, new product lines. They want to come and bring you the samples. And we want to offer people, as much options as we can on the shelf. So I will send them an SOP of how we accept samples. And it's with an invoice. And you will receive cash over camera. Is it 70 cents? No problem. Here's 70 cents in cash. And I need an invoice, and I need it to say paid on there. And I need you to say that it was paid with cash on this date. And people are like, we don't need your 70 cents. I'm like, you absolutely do need my 70
Yes,
cents.
you do.
And here's why. Please read my SOP. And as long as you bring me my metric manifest along with an invoice and the products all accounted for and my package tags match and everything is good to go, we are happy to accept that product. So I'm not going to let another license owner put my license in jeopardy. I'm going to control that whole situation of how product ends up under my possession, right? Because legally, when I sign that metric manifest, that I'm now taking responsibility of that product and how it's distributed.
And I think you're doing your employees an injustice too if you don't give them a standard operating procedure to follow, because sometimes if they don't have one to actually look at or follow, they'll guess. That's where a lot of people have gotten in trouble with their businesses, is they don't know what to do and there's no SOP to look at. So they'll try to do the right thing and make people happy and say, okay, I'll accept it. Here's your buyback. Okay. Not knowing that if they would have had an SOP to refer to, it would have saved their position too.
And most people want to do the right thing. They really do. They're begging for structure. So if an employer can prove that they did their due diligence and they offered correct training and support to do things in a compliant manner, what would happen to the employee if they are the ones proven to be at fault? What are some of the scenarios you've seen in that case?
So it all depends, once again, what the violation is. The violation can stem from a verbal warning to a written warning on the occupational badge holder. Then it can go up to an order to show cause, where they can be sanctioned with a suspension of their occupational badge, which means they won't be able to work in the industry. For example, a underage sale usually carries a 90-day suspension on their occupational badge. That's 3 months that you can't work at the job that you've been doing or the job that you love. So now you've got to go find a different position just because you didn't have an SOP to follow, and you didn't. So even if you had the SOP and you didn't follow it, then it goes back on the employee, and the business owner can say, we did everything we could. And then of course that order to show cause would be a lot less because they did every mitigating factor that they could.
And what has your experience been with companies that can prove that they've done everything that they possibly could?
The fines are reduced. If there is a suspension of days, they would be less. The way that the state of Colorado sets up is there's a maximum fine that can be levied per violation. So they have their leeway to charge anything from 0 all the way up to that maximum. A lot of your very, very serious violations will carry up to $100,000 fine. Well, if the licensee's done everything that they possibly could, that fine can be reduced from $100,000 down to $2,500. So once again, it's all that mitigating factor. What has that licensee done? And that's why I love the task management where, yes, we trained them. Here's the training records. They're constantly trained every quarter on this, and they were given the SOPs that day to read. So they should have known every single step that they should have done. And that's as simple as not just checking an ID at the door. That's your inventory management. That's when do you do your inventory management? One of the big things that we found as a problem was, how often does a company check a battery backup? I've gone into places and done inspections, and I'll pull the plug on the DVR on the battery backup and see how long the battery lasts. Sometimes only lasts 5 minutes, and it'll shut down. And I asked them, well, why is this? And they're like, well, we've never checked it before. We just figured it's a battery backup. It's plugged in. It should work. That should be part of your SOPs too. SOPs aren't something that are done every single day. They should be done for every aspect of the business. And they can be set up to be quarterly. They can be set up to be once every 6 months. However you deem that it needs to be. MED is not there to say how often you need to do a battery backup check. That's something that you need to build into your SOPs. And we can help answer those questions on what I think it should be. But ultimately it comes down to the licensee. You're responsible to have that battery backup up and working. Now, your manager should be given the SOP so that they can have direction on how often they need to check the DVR battery backup.
How to pull that footage, how to put it onto an external drive to be able to relay it and give it to you guys. So I actually do, when I manage facilities, I have a monthly manager security just hour of training. So not only do we run through the whole SOP for how to work the DVR, is inside the DVR, when you unlock it, it's on the door and you can pull that document straight off. And so if you have something, because when the MED's there looking over your shoulder, it's scary. And so you kind of forget everything you've ever known, really. And so I would actually train my managers every single month. We would go in and someone else would have to operate, pull up the still color image and print it, pull up a certain section of video and pull up, the 5 to 10 minutes or whatever and extract it and put it onto a thumb drive and be able to, we would have a thumb drive that was actually attached to the DVR as well. So we had everything available for them to give it to them. Then we also had printed documentation of now how to open that file. So when the police came, when the MED came, we could give them not only the drive that it was on, or we could also give them a piece of paper that says, this is now how you open this on both a Mac and a PC, because I don't know what they're operating off of. And so that was something that I require in my facilities on a monthly basis, and just having that awareness and being able to do it. Because if it's something you learned a year ago and then the MED comes in or the police come in and they're investigating something, it does not look good when you don't know how to do that. And that starts to raise red flags for your inspector. If they don't know how to do this simple task, what else do they not know how to do here? And then they start digging. And so my goal was to always keep you guys at the surface, right? If I could answer everything very quickly and give you what you needed, and I looked like I had it together, that usually kept you guys from digging any further, which was always my goal, was to get you out as soon as you got there.
And I will confess a little secret there. If you're working on the DVR trying to figure out all that stuff, I mean, and I'm standing there, I am going to look around. If like you said, if I come in to get a specific information, I get it and I'm out and gone. But if I've got to wait longer, I start looking around. It's not that I'm being nosy, but I am, because that was my job.
That's your job. You're an inspector.
That was my job, yeah. And
yeah,
the more time I spent there. But yeah, the SOPs, they really need to be enforced. Like checking the 40 days on a DVR. So many times have cultivations used motion cameras, which are great. They're a great space saver. but all of a sudden you've got a fan in a room that's blowing a leaf, and now all of a sudden the camera is recording 24/7 instead of just on motion. So it's eating up all that DVR space that they had. So when we'd look for the 40 days and do inspections on that, they wouldn't have it. And they always said, well, my guy who put it in 2 years ago guaranteed that I had 40 days. Well, you've changed cameras out in that time. You've had motion changed out. Somebody came in and put a fan somewhere in your cultivation, which is making that run more. And if your SOP, just like the battery backup, on a quarterly basis, check what our rules say. 40 days, make sure you got 41 or 45, or how many that you think you want to have over the fact. MED's rules are the minimum that you have to have. So that 40 days, if you want to have 140 days, have at it. MED can only check up to that 40 days, though, as far as a rule violation. But your SOP needs to clearly state how often you need to check these things. And that's why, on the first month of, of the year, or this or that, wherever you want to put it, but that SOP needs to be there and be used, like not in that dusty book in the
Yeah,
back.
no, and I had it on a calendar. Hey, we're doing our security check today. And every single time a different manager would be responsible, and we'd all be watching what that manager did. And I'd make them pull up, go to day 37 from today. And they'd have to figure out what day that was. And, we would make sure that those things were in place and that the backup was working. Because I have also been in scenarios where managers didn't do that, and it wasn't pretty.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, we've got so many of my investigations stemmed around the lack of having a standard operating procedure. There's so many different investigations that we did that ultimately resulted in so many large fines, so many lost licenses. The fact that the owner had to sell the licenses as part of the agreement, because the owner gave the manager full reign and says, run this business with no standard operating procedure.
Well, and also with 5 different hats, right? So not only get product out at the end of the day, but then I also need you to dedicate, each facility, we offer 9 different facility types in cannabis and hemp, retail, cultivation, manufacturing, transportation, and delivery. Each one of those facility types took me a year to compose. It is time consuming. And it's someone's full-time job for the first little bit. And then as you review and update as regulations change, it's someone's, part-time job after that. And then depending on your company growth and training and how many staff members you have and things like that, it's a lot of time dedicated to SOPs. And I see so many facility owners making the mistake of putting it on the back burner, thinking they'll eventually get to it. But what gets to them first is a regulatory mess up and an inspector coming in, and they had the best intentions to make that SOP or to update that SOP, but it never happened because they didn't have the time. And so that's where we come in, and we save companies hundreds of hours in developmental and organizational work. And we can kind of help replace that full-time compliance director position. Just from the oversight and from the software that we're able to kind of streamline all of these things into one place. And it's priceless, especially when you start talking about $200,000 fines that can be added on to a $400,000 fine, when you could have just invested a little bit of time and money into your SOPs.
And I'll tell you a couple things that I like about Katie's system too, is that it keeps track of all the previous versions of the SOP. So if you're in a cultivation and 6 months down the road, you're finding that your yield isn't as good as it was 6 months before that, you can go back to your SOPs and say, what did we change? So it keeps track of stuff that way. So you're not trying to reinvent the wheel or go through which paper document. I don't know which SOP was the last one versus, because you keep putting them in a folder behind each other. The other thing that's really nice too is if you have a problem downstream, you can trace it back to where it started. You've got every single thing in the standard operating procedure, from HR policies and how to clean the measuring cup that you're using. That way you can identify and find where problems are being caused easier than if you have a very minimal SOP or not one at all.
Yeah, and I think but one of my favorite stories, I think you got an SOP that said basically grow the weed and grow it well.
Yeah. Yeah. Sell weed, put money in cash register.
I
That was
love
another
it.
one. I mean, I've literally gone to places where they've had a half a page of SOP, or some places didn't have it at all. I just do whatever the guy told me to do.
See, and
Well,
I
who's the
feel for
guy?
those
He
employees
was
and
here
those
earlier.
managers. We just had a comment from Jason. It would have been a hell of a lot easier for my training at some of my dispensary jobs if they had an SOP. It bothered me that they were so disorganized, especially since they could lose so much by not having a simple, easy, followable guide. So your employees are suffering. Give them the tools and the knowledge to be confident in their performance. They want to be in this industry. They're here for a reason. They're cannabis activists. They believe in this plant. They believe in what the plant has to offer, and they want to succeed. And by being an owner without having the proper SOPs or training in place, you are doing them a disservice. Tom, how often, we have another question here. How often would you suggest updating SOPs?
So that's a multi-leveled answered question to deal with that one. So anytime there's a rule change, the SOPs need to be reviewed. So however often you get different rules is when you need to go back to that SOP, number one. The other time is if anytime you change a process. SOPs can be updated uh, weekly if you're changing a process. You're trying to learn how to get a better yield. So you're trying to figure out which fertilizer is working better. So you can change your SOP to change from Heinz ketchup to Hunt's ketchup that easily. So your SOPs can be changed as often as you need to change your process, but they should be looked at least quarterly because you've got rule changes that happen, and most times you've got some that take effect immediately. Then you have some that take effect, at a set date down the road, a couple calendar months down the road. So if you're looking at it that way, you'll be sure to catch any problems that you have with your SOP.
Well, and all of these
And honestly,
companies are new, right? I mean, cannabis is a brand new industry, and every operator is really new, especially in these states that are just now joining the adult use, the adult use train, I'll say. And your procedures develop and they change very quickly as you evolve and as your volumes change and new employees come on board and things start moving really fast. And so it's really easy to get away from the focus of SOPs and training and making sure all that documentation is in place. You get so caught up in the operations and getting product out of the door every day to keep the lights on. So it really does take some effort and some dedication to review, have your review process, put it on the calendar, know that that time is going to be dedicated to this.
absolutely.
I will open up the floor for any other questions that our viewers might have. I think we have pretty much convinced everybody the importance of SOPs and their cannabis and hemp operations. And if not, please call us because you're exactly who we need to talk to.
And I can't stress enough that, I mean, most of the violations that we've dealt with have been, besides having an employee who just totally ignored the SOP. Other than that, a lot of the problems we've had and the investigations that we've worked have stemmed from people not having an SOP, like the one I told you about with the $500,000 worth of concentrate. So the one person that was giving out the sheet of shatter had no control over getting it back. So when they're giving out, I'm going to use round numbers, these aren't the actual numbers. He was giving out a sheet of 1,000 grams, and then the person that was doing the intake was only taking in 800 grams. Well, they didn't know that on their SOP that they need to talk with this person or get those records or those files and compare the two to make sure that you're not having the loss. So this owner just, okay, just moving along.
Well, you
And
want
that
to
was
trust your employees. You want to trust the people you put into those roles. And I
trust but
caught someone
verify.
red-handed doing an inventory reconciliation. This guy knew I was there, counting all the things. And I was updating SOPs along with it and retraining managers in this whole process. I spent about 2 weeks on site at this facility. So we're handing over concentrate to this guy to label. He's giving it back. They're putting it on the shelf. I'm like, who's recounting that product? What do you mean? A manager, someone you guys can trust, needs to recount that product. Individual who is labeling took 7 grams in the morning. We're 7 grams short. Okay, he goes off to lunch. Let's give him another chance here. Same thing occurs in the afternoon. Another like 7 grams are missing. That guy worked there for months. Who knows how many thousands of, and it started making sense why all these packages were over when the material was not existing. And this guy was doing it knowing that I was there. And so having those double, those double checks and those checks and balances in place are so important, and following them. So not only having them written out, but even though you don't want to recount something because someone should be able to do their job, your job as an inventory manager is to make sure that that inventory is accounted for, and that what's being put on the shelf is actually what's being put on the shelf, and what's being sold is being reported as sold. Because those little holes can get you into a lot of trouble too, not doing those things. Not only from losing the profit of the product, but MED coming in and realizing you guys are not accounting for your inventory in a responsible manner. And unfortunately, we're going to have to give you this fine.
And that was a big one too, is not reconciling metric. Oh
man, the things I have seen in metric.
Yes.
It's scary. It's scary.
Yes.
But it's hard. I go into metric and I do my inventory reconciliations in the middle of the night. And one facility that had been in business for 10 years called me in tears, and they're just like, Katie, I cannot do this inventory thing. It's always messed up. So we brought in an inventory manager to come in at 4 a.m. every morning. They counted for about 4 hours. So 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., they counted one category a day. Well, 2 categories. They do their largest selling category every day, and then they would do another category also. And then from 8 to 10 a.m., they had 2 hours to figure out any discrepancies, get metric working, and then get their point of sale system matching. And so doing that on a daily basis, one category at a time, meaning every package gets looked at least once a week, it's huge than just waiting every month or every quarter or 6 months to try to fix it all. It really needs to be looked at on a very consistent basis. All right. Well, I had a great time tonight. Thank you for the conversation. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Tom. And I just want to say, ask the Regulator guys. We're here. Submit your questions. Let us know all of those burning questions that you've been dying to ask your regulator, but you don't want to end up on the radar. We are here to help and assist any way that we can.
Absolutely. Ask away.
All right. Lauren, is there anything else that you need from us?
You're good to go.
Okay. We'll leave you guys with a video from one of our clients here in New Mexico, Best Days. And hope you enjoyed this evening's podcast, and we'll see you next month.
Hi, Goodman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Best Days. We're here in New Mexico. We have many buildings that are under lease and in development, and many that are actually currently operational. So from a production perspective, we have a warehouse grow facility, we have outdoor farms, we have a processing center in which those outdoor farms need to go. We have manufacturing site, in which place we make all of our secondary products, all of our edibles, we got to package everything. And then from a retail perspective, we have 3 open retail stores, and we're about to expand 5 more as we head into adult use, which we're very excited about. Build My SOP has been extremely helpful for us and makes everything much smoother. Cannabis is a very interesting world to operate in because its regulatory changes are ongoing. We go from a regulator to a new regulator and a new set of rules. Going from medical, going into adult use, things keep changing and developing. And there's a lot of information to pass on to all of our staff, which are working in different sites with different needs and different specific operating procedures. Build My SOP gives us this very easy platform that is accessible to those employees, both to go back and see an SOP, to look at it, to make sure they're following protocol as originally asked. We can use it in training, and they also are signing off. So they have stated that we have asked them to do it in a certain way, and they're able to do it, and that makes it a lot easier for me at the end of the day, just to know that we are doing everything we can do to stay as forward with compliance as we can possibly imagine.